Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Laura Anderson with Chord Psychology Services. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist who's practiced for over a couple of decades now, and I'm really thrilled to be an FIGT member. And it's an honor for me to be here today talking about privilege and how to talk to kids about privilege, how to have sometimes hard conversations with them about it. So I'm going to jump right in. Privilege is, by definition, a special right, advantage, or immunity granted to or available only to a particular person or group. And as we know, there are many kinds of privilege based on race, religion, able-bodied status, sexual orientation, gender identity, education, social class, or as I've heard said, you know you have privilege if the Supreme Court hasn't had to decide if you get to have the same rights as other people. As Supreme Court in the US, but the Supreme Court of any land, a governing body hasn't had to decide if you have the same rights as your peers, then you have privilege. So it can be a hard thing to talk about with kids. Why? Number one, if you have privilege, it's almost like the water we swim in. It's the air we breathe. We get so used to it that it's really hard to see the boundaries of it, and it's hard to know how to name. Number two, in the expat world with the gift of travel, and lots of living opportunities, also comes a glimpse into a wide range of access to education, money, and safety, which can lead to some guilt. Because of this idea that privilege is unearned and that others don't have it, when we feel guilty, many of us avoid that feeling of guilt by not wanting to think about it. It's also easier to believe that the differences are by chance, or sometimes because of a need for maybe others to work more. It's easier for us to sort of look outward as an explanation for the injustices and the disparities, because the idea of a just world, well, people who are kind and work hard get great things, is comforting in its predictability and its order. Yanking the rug away of the just world beliefs can be uncomfortable and precarious. We also may feel conflicted about this idea that we have privilege based on our lived experience. And so we want to avoid that conflicted feeling. So it's hard to talk about privilege because it can be really uncomfortable to face it. And so we avoid uncomfortable, conflicted feelings. Number three, we avoid it because it challenges the idea that hard work directly leads to success or not. And most of us parents want our kids to knuckle down, work really hard, and believe that the harder they work, the better things will be for them. And we don't want kids who kind of sit back on their haunches in this idea of privilege. And we also don't want them to feel the guilt and discomfort we feel. So these are reasons we don't talk to our kids. Now I'm here to tell you we need to push through this. The world and our kids need us to push through and find a comfortable way to talk to them. There's beauty in diversity and difference everywhere. When systems of privilege are in place, true equity means that we have to share some of the benefits. And while these systems uphold our privilege and they serve us, the imbalance and the harm that it brings to others needs to be challenged. Before we can think about how to share our privilege and how to use it for good, we need to recognize and understand it. Many of the ills in the world based on privilege absolutely require change from the people in the privileged positions. The alternative is that we sit back and seem confused by the disparity and anger around us, and we wait for people with less privilege to show us how they plan to change things in a way that hopefully doesn't make us uncomfortable. So there are powerful ways to leverage privilege and ways that can be uncomfortable, but they don't have to be scary. We have the opportunity to name it for our kids and teach them to use their privilege wisely and to make change in the system. So how do we talk about it? My dad used to say, you know, it's tough to climb a mountain when you start a foot from the top. That was his way of talking to me about the privilege that I had. I was still climbing and I was still working, but I'd had a head start. So what we want to do with our kids is talk early to them about the idea of systems in place that are created and perpetuated to maintain. And you can do that at age appropriate levels. For instance, you have to describe privilege in terms they understand. Kids are really big on fairness, young kids in particular. Talk to them. Sometimes certain skin colors or people with certain skin colors or beliefs or identities are treated better than others. And that's not fair. For young children, you can talk about it like sometimes people get head starts in a race and they have had head starts for many, many, many years. And that's not fair. And then they deny having had a head start, and everyone is told they won because they worked harder or faster. That's not fair. That doesn't make sense, does it? So that's an example. You can use a race running example to explain, and the idea of head starts. You can also talk about, like with siblings, right? You sit them down or in conversation around current events. You can say, imagine if I gave, older sister here a cookie every day because she happened to be born first. So I'm going to give her a cookie every single day. Does that seem fair? And then I'm going to give all kinds of extra television time or screen time to the kid in the house who has the most cookies. That's unfair twice. That's an example of privilege based on something that had to do with her identity and was beyond her control. So, and explain to your kids that that kind of cookie giving and Head Start giving happens all the time in the world. Start naming that your own family has privilege. You can even use it, like our family has lots of cookies and our family has had some Head Starts, but it's not something we have to feel bad or guilty about. It's something that we can use for good. We can use it to be good guys in the whole system, right? I think as you start talking to teenagers, you can talk to them directly about having privilege doesn't mean that nothing bad ever happens to you or nothing hard ever happens to you. It means that your race or religion or class or education isn't what is at the core of causing that hardship. It doesn't mean you don't work for things and aren't expected to create things for yourself. So this is a much longer conversation. This was a soundbite. I think the key takeaways are ultimately you're teaching your family to see beauty in differences, to think deeply about the injustices they see, and to recognize that there are systems in place and that unfairness happens, and start naming it that way when kids are young, so that you can have more complex conversations as they age. And remember, you'll make mistakes. We can't stay comfortable and do this work. It is awkward to examine your own privilege and to check in and make sure that you're using it for good. Some of our greatest growth comes from discomfort, and the expat community knows that better than many others in the world when we're in our stretch zones and we're opening our eyes and our hearts and our minds to understand how to bring and celebrate and hold up the beauty of diversity, and really start the conversations young with your children so that they have language and they have a way of really thinking through what they see that's reflected around them. We're all in this together. Thanks, FIGT, for the option and the opportunity to talk about this. Take care. Thanks again to FIGT for giving me the opportunity to talk about this. It's really close to my heart. You can join me for more coffee and conversations and Facebook Lives that I do every Friday with Chord Psychology services. Come pop in and have a coffee and a chat with me about how to have hard conversations with kids and teens about a range of subjects, including privilege and racism and gender identity. So join me and we'll talk together about how to have hard conversations with kids and teens about current events and all kinds of things. I can also be found at drlauraanderson.com. Thanks again, FIGT.